Or good morning or good evening, wherever you are joining us from. I know we have an international audience joining us here today. And welcome to today's webinar, which is called Seeing Through the Hype: What Potential Does the Metaverse Hold for Governments? I'm Siobhan Benita. I'm a former UK civil servant, and I'm delighted to be chairing this webinar on behalf of Global Government Forum and Global Government FinTech, which are publications that serve civil servants all around the world. Now, in terms of today's topic, many of the ingredients that people think about when they think about the metaverse are already with us. So the digital interaction of people with each other or with digital content in immersive worlds across many devices, including virtual reality. Tech giants are increasingly building technology to create and engage with these virtual worlds, a trend probably best epitomized by Facebook's rebrand in 2021 as Meta to reflect its metaverse ambitions. But in today's webinar, we're going to consider what potential benefits the metaverse might hold for governments and public sector organizations, both in terms of the delivery of services to the public and perhaps also in their own internal operations. We have a fantastic panel of speakers with us here today, and I'm going to introduce them in a moment. But once we have heard from our speakers, it will be your opportunity as our audience to put your questions to our panelists. So you should see on your device somewhere a Q&A function. At any point from now on, please use that Q&A function to message in your questions, and we'll get through as many of those as we can before the end of the webinar today. But now to our fantastic panel. So first we will hear from Benjamin Welby, who is a policy analyst in the Open and Innovative Government Division at the Directorate for Public Governance at the OECD. Benjamin leads work supporting governments with digital identity, public sector digital talent and skills, and public service design and delivery. His work has also covered the impact of digital government on citizen well-being and the data-driven public sector. Then we will hear from Sue-Ann Wang, who is currently working as an external relations manager at the Digital Policy Division in Seoul Metropolitan Government in South Korea. The Digital Policy Division is in charge of shaping the digital policies for the city of Seoul, international cooperation between other smart cities, and implementing Metaverse Seoul. Unfortunately, Sue-Ann is not able to stay for the Q&A session after our panelists have spoken, but she has very kindly said, if you have particular questions for Sue-Ann, please still message them in and she will take them and answer them offline. Then we head over to India, where we will hear from Gayatri Pandarangi, who is Senior Technical Director in the National Informatics Centre at the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. Her career of 29 years at the Informatics Centre has been a blend of handling challenging e-governance IT projects right from system architecture through implementation and technical support. She's also a member of the India Working Group, which works on frameworks for government enterprises across India. And she's helped with international digital transformation programs as well, including digital transformation for the Republic of Mauritius. Then we will hear from Hannah Youssef George, who is Deputy Director for Digital Strategy at the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. Hannah's team focuses on new or emerging issues in the digital sphere. Previously, Hannah worked on digital markets policy, EU exit with a focus on Horizon 2020 funding and education funding policy as well. And Hannah received an OBE for public service in 2019. And then last, but by no means least, we will hear from David Knott, who is the Chief Technology Officer for the UK Government, which sits in the Central Digital and Data Office in the Cabinet Office. David is a technology leader, strategist and architect with over 30 years experience across a range of industries, including banking, insurance, transportation, utilities and media. And prior to starting his current role, David's recent roles were as expert partner at Boston Consulting Group, a digital transformation officer at Google, and chief architect at HSBC. So I'm sure you will agree with me, we really do have a fantastic expert panel with us here today. As I said, please take this opportunity to message in your questions, and we will get through as many of those as we can once we have heard from all of our speakers. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Benjamin to give us his opening remarks. Over to you, Benjamin.
Thank you, Siobhan, and hello, everybody. Lovely to be with you. As Siobhan mentioned, I'm from the OECD, and I'm part of a team that looks at digital government and data in this question of how do we help governments become more open and innovative. And I'm going to start with some broad brushstrokes, and then I'm going to really sit and enjoy listening to the other panelists talk about some more of the detail with the rest of you. Siobhan's given a pretty good introduction to what is the metaverse. But I think this idea perhaps that we're heading towards a seamless integration of digital and physical realities is perhaps still a little bit of a way off from becoming something that's very mainstream. And perhaps in the audience, I've upset some ardent advocates with that, I don't know. But I think in general, most of us have had experiences of this as second or third hand. We might have seen some media coverage, we might have seen it in movies or books, we might have played with a virtual reality headset in more recent times, perhaps at home. But I'm not sure many of us have really ever sat down and thought hard about what does this mean for the work of public servants. And when we are thinking about new technology at the OECD, we really have a same sort of starting point, which is, is this thing, this new thing, is the metaverse going to transform the way and help governments achieve more seamless, data-driven, proactive government? Is it going to increase access? Is it going to bridge digital divides? Or actually, is it going to make some of those things worse? Now, the rest of the panel, I think, will go through good examples of what it is. I'll go through very quickly some examples. In the UAE, there is a police station in the metaverse. We could be meeting in the metaverse for today's session. We can be using it to create virtual representations of real world things, to simulate things or work through possible opportunities. In the UK, one of my former colleagues has done a master's thesis on visualizing hierarchical cybersecurity data within the metaverse. The opportunities, the potentials are quite varied, quite broad. It's really a question of people's creativity, and that's fantastic to see. But I think it's also true that some of these things have been being talked about for quite a long time. And if now in today's version of the metaverse is going to be different, what needs to change within the public sector? And so we start, the OECD always starts on this premise, which is that we need to focus on the needs of citizens and users. We need to ask whether the metaverse can fulfill its obligations on this front to ensure that rights and values are respected, that it prevents potential risks or harms, and that when the public sector thinks about using it, the motivations retain that question of inclusion and accessibility for all. Technical and practical challenges come into play. Is this thing viable for the purpose that's been imagined? And there's a whole breadth of issues here which we see as relevant in any transformation effort. Questions of infrastructure, and that includes the building blocks like digital identity, but questions like standards for interoperability, security, privacy, and data protection, those big questions about how we can trust things in society. And then our ethics, our accountability, the values that we have in the public sector, how are we enshrining these things? We've got to consider whether government is equipped for these things in the long term, that there is sustainable investment, sustainable work on skills. And this is, again, another general truth for the 21st century and being effective. Is government thinking about those things? And finally, whether the cultural, legal, and institutional barriers within organizations have had the attention that they need. Public administrations need these environments that foster experimentation, innovation, and collaboration. And that means thinking about that wider governance piece of leadership, of strategic overarching ideas, of organizational structures, and legislation and policy where needed. And I think for me, the jury is out on the extent to which the metaverse will reshape the design and delivery of public services. But I think it might become a valuable tool for the public sector. And the important thing is that we don't yet know. Maybe by the end of the session, I will have changed my mind. But that what we can say is that government needs to be able to respond to user needs where that makes sense. They need to be in the places that their stakeholders, their users are, and they need to be looking always to find more effective and better ways to govern. And so if that is the metaverse, then the public sector needs to be thinking about how to shape it and how to contribute to it. And so to just tie this together, I would say that governments need to think about this in 3 dimensions. They need to be thinking about it for the public, because no one should ever be left behind or denied access to the things which are of government. But within government, it needs to be something that is considered about securing leadership and strategic support in line with those public sector values. And then finally, globally, because the whole thing about the metaverse is that it's transcending individual jurisdictions. So the policy challenges are inherently international. So that means partnering and collaborating with the ecosystem in its broadest sense, of course, between different governments, and that is the role and the job of the OECD. But it's about having those relationships with the private sector, academia, and civil society as well. So thank you very much. I will hand back to Siobhan.
Benjamin, thank you so much. What a great way to start, because I think you've really set out that kind of overarching picture, giving us kind of a sense of a bit more of what the metaverse might be. I really liked your thing there that maybe we could hold the next webinar about the metaverse in the metaverse itself. I think that would be a really good idea. But also, I think you set down some challenges. I think, as you say, the jury's out. So while we want government to be embracing innovation, we want government to be thinking about how they might improve public services with some new technologies. You said these foundations need to be in place: standards, privacy, questions around those, data protection, embedding public sector values, skills and investment needed. And then how do you get the governance and the regulation and the legislation right? And will it ultimately improve services and be inclusive for everybody? It would be interesting, maybe we should have asked the audience on this one, like yourself, before and after we've heard whether their views have changed on the metaverse as well. But somebody who might change some views, I think, will be our next speaker, because this is a place where the metaverse is already in operation. So Suan, thanks to Benjamin, and Suan, we're coming over to you now. Suan, we have to take you off mute. Thanks.
Thank you, Siobhan. Hello, everybody. It's nice to meet you via Zoom today. My name is Suan Wang from Digital Policy Division, Seoul Metropolitan Government, Korea. Today, I will briefly explain how City of Seoul is running its own metaverse, how we promote it, with what type of programs in it. Yes. In the past, we tried to utilize existing private companies' platforms like Geppetto for the city affairs. Like you see, we hosted some variety events within Geppetto. However, soon we faced the following problems while using the existing platforms. First, there were several things to consider, such as security. When linking with the Seoul Metropolitan Government's internal systems, it was very difficult to reflect all the requirements that the city requires. Second, the system was built mainly for one-off content, so there was a limit to continuously providing services to the citizens. In order to overcome these limitations, City of Seoul established a vision and core values to build its own metaverse platform. We call it Metaverse Seoul, a new frontier of Seoul. And we have 3 core values: freedom, companion, and connection. Unfortunately, I'm not going to go over all the details because I have very limited time and I have a lot to show you guys today. So Metaverse Seoul aims to provide the 3 values introduced above through 3-dimensional services in the field of economy, education, culture, tourism, communication, urbanization, and administration. Metaverse Seoul is being built in 3 phases for a total of 5 years from 2021, which is a pilot. So basically stage 1 starts from 2022 till until the stage 3, 2026. After the pilot service, Metaverse Seoul started building a full-scale Metaverse Seoul in 2022, last year, and focused on preparing the foundation for Metaverse Seoul and building some content. So this year is the second stage. We just started. So let me briefly introduce you to the first phase of the Metaverse Seoul project that was launched last year. In the first phase of the project, the foundation platform was established and virtual services in various fields were established, as you can see on the screen. Let me go over one by one very briefly. In Metaverse Seoul, anyone can open and use a meeting space at any time, and in the meeting room space, documents such as PDF files can be shared and displayed on the screen. In addition to text and voice chatting, a video conferencing solution is also installed, allowing meetings to be held while checking each other's faces. Metaverse Seoul implemented a 360-degree view of the top 10 attractions in Seoul, selected by citizens through a survey. You can easily access Seoul's top 10 attractions without having to visit Seoul. At the Metaverse Seoul FinTech Lab Promotion Hall, there are promotion booths for companies that have moved into the real Seoul FinTech Lab, which is located in Seoul, Yeouido. This year, a networking event for representatives of FinTech Lab resident companies will also be held in Metaverse Seoul. In the Avatar Virtual Counseling Room, mentors and mentees can have one-on-one counseling through a special avatars, such as bees and the little prince you can see on the screen here. And in Tech Square of Metaverse Seoul, you can calculate and estimate the tax amount that you're supposed to pay, or you can ask questions to the local tax administration through a chatbot linked to the e-tax system, which is the internet tax payment system of Seoul. You can also check out Seoul Mayor's office, which provides a window for citizens to propose their opinions to the city of Seoul. In the exhibition and contest space, candidates for ongoing public contests can be displayed and voted for. And there is also space where past winners' works are displayed. Starting in April of this year, last month, the second phase of the Metaverse Seoul project was launched. This year, we will establish Seoul Safety Experience Center, Seoul Disaster Simulation Center, we call it, Real Estate Contract Simulation, and Dongdaemun Design Plaza Avatar Runway. Metaverse Seoul is attracting attention from overseas as a world's first own Metaverse platform for city government. As you can see, Times selected Metaverse Seoul as the first case of the Metaverse category, and many different attractions from the globally. For the app itself, you can search for the Metaverse Seoul app in the Google Play Store or Apple App Store. Currently, we're actively working on the language options so that the guests or foreigners can also use it just like the registered guest. So this is all I have prepared today. Thank you for listening, everybody.
Thank you so much, Soo-Ann. I mean, it's great that you have the example. We can actually see what it looks like, and fascinating to show. I mean, I noted down there at least 9 different areas where people can already use the metaverse, but you then mentioned many more coming down the road. So it starts to help people to understand how this might be used in terms of public services. And as you say, they're already attracting international kind of recognition, but also, you know, sharing of that good practice. So it'll be interesting to see what other cities now around the world start to do based on kind of your own experience. There is so much there. I'm so sorry we had so little time, but to the audience, please, if you do have any questions for Soo-Ann on kind of investment, on how this work, lessons learned, where they're going next, kind of how people, get into the metaverse, all of those kind of things, please do message them in. And Suan is very happy to take those questions offline. Thank you so much, Suan, for joining us. I know it's been very late there in Korea. I know you'll be around for a little while, but I know you also have to go at some point soon. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Gayatri, in India, we are coming over to you now. Over to you.
Yeah, hello.
Hi.
Yeah, greetings to the respected chair and the esteemed panel members and all the virtual audience who have joined this webinar on Metaverse. Thank you for having me here. I'm Dr. Gayatri Pandurangi, Senior Director, IT from NIC, that is National Informatics Center, Government of India. At NIC, we serve the ministries and departments across the country. Our services include email, internet, video conferencing, data center services, software development and implementation. So today I'd like to present my perspective of the metaverse for government in the context of the current scenario of e-governance in India, the opportunities available and the challenges involved in achieving a citizen-centric metaverse. Technology has given us power to express ourselves and experience the world with ever greater richness, says Mark Zuckerberg. He also once said metaverse is the future of mobile internet. Well, in India, we are at a stage where several of the services are offered on mobile. Say I can renew my driver's license in just a few clicks. I click my selfie and it is compared with the earlier photograph, and in some time my license is renewed. So we have made significant progress in digitalizing our services. Many initiatives like the National E-Governance Program, Digital India, MyGov platform, all these have been launched to improve the citizen services, to bring more transparency and accountability to the government. And these programs aim to provide wide range of digital services to citizens, including access to government services, digital literacy, digital infrastructure, and so on. And they also support to initiate schemes such as Aadhaar, that is the digital ID program, to award digital ID to every citizen in the country, and BharatNet, that is the fiber optic network program, and public Wi-Fi hotspots, electronics manufacturing, and so on. So given this background, visualizing services over a metaverse, I would say there will be a sea change in citizen service delivery. Like for example, in agriculture sector, agriculture is the main occupation in India. This sector provides livelihood to about 95 million households, which is more than 100 million farmers. So we can think of virtual marketplaces, virtual agricultural extension services, where farmers can access real-time information about crop management, weather conditions, market trends, and so on. Then virtual farm management, where farmers can monitor their crops, manage irrigation, track inputs such as fertilizers, pesticides, so which can help them to optimize their resource use and improve yields. And also we can think of farming communities where they get peer-to-peer support, which can help them in overcoming isolation and also access information. Then we even think of virtual training and education, where they can learn new skills and techniques to improve their farming practices. And so apart from this, we can think of it, the education sector, where we can think of like virtual classrooms and immersive learning experiences to the students, to enable them to learn by doing, virtual simulations and interactive experiences, which can make learning more engaging and effective. And also we can think of personalized learning, where it is learning is tailored to the needs and the learning styles and pace of the students to improve their learning outcomes and also overcome any learning challenges. Then we can think of virtual libraries and resources, which enable students to access learning material from anywhere in the world. So coming to healthcare, we can think of telemedicine, virtual health assessments, enabling patients to monitor their health and receive guidance, and also health education and training, very important, because we have recently experienced the pandemic times, where the healthcare workers, they had tough time managing themselves and also managing the patients, the rush which was coming to the hospital and the health facilities. So health education can improve awareness and can guide on preventive measures and help healthcare providers to stay updated on the latest medical practices. And we can think of virtual records, health records, enabling patients to access their medical records from anywhere in the world, which can improve continuity of care and enable patients to receive more personalized treatment. So apart from these sectors, we can think of public services. We have citizen can directly engage the government through virtual community halls or any participate in government decision-making process, participating in virtual voting and so on. We have just now listened about smart city, that is SEO. So this is yet another application. So to say metaverse has the potential to revolutionize the way citizen services are delivered and improve the quality and accessibility of government services. But to achieve this, the government needs to invest in digital infrastructure, develop a skilled workforce, and develop policies that enable use of metaverse-based systems while protecting the citizens' privacy and security. So while meeting these objectives, I would still call them as challenges. There are also challenges to meet with, such as providing digital IDs, addressing digital divide, literacy, cost factors, social, cultural, and linguistic challenges, accessibility challenges, making available renewable energy resources, and above all, we need thinkers, strategists, business architects, legal experts who would contribute to reimagine and re-engineering the way service delivery can happen. So having visualized the target state and the challenges involved, so to set the pathway for a transformed state, it is going to be a long journey. We need to get the basic architecture right. The platforms that get built have to be open with standards, because we need to move things across the platforms, enabling interoperability, which is very easily said than done actually. So some of the accelerating points or success factors could be reduction in costs of establishing and maintaining the infrastructure, like PPP models may help here, and addressing the energy requirements, maybe more R&D is there in pipeline probably. So it has to be affordable ultimately. It has to be affordable to the government and also to the citizen too. So I would stop here for now. And I thank Global Government Forum for giving me this opportunity. It is a great learning opportunity for me. Thank you so much.
Dr. Gayatri, thank you so much. I mean, I get the impression that you've identified similar challenges to Benjamin was saying in the first thing. So you've mentioned as well the need for investment in technology, in skills, in making sure the data is secure, the privacy, those issues around potential digital divide as well, and legislation. However, I think you're slightly more optimistic about the potential of the kind of transformative benefits if we can get this right. And really good to have those kind of examples that you gave from agriculture, from education, and from healthcare, maybe in particular in a country as large as India, kind of reaching out to the entire population. Something like the metaverse, I think, could have huge benefits. Thank you so much for the presentation. Hannah, we are coming over to you next.
Great. Thanks very much, everyone, for having me here. I think this has been a fascinating session so far, and I've really enjoyed hearing what the other speakers have had to say. I suspect everyone's quite keen to get onto the discussion, so I'm going to try and keep this quite brief. I'm just going to set out quickly where I'm coming from, and then secondly, to offer some reflections on our policy thinking at the moment around the metaverse. So as Siobhan said at the start, I'm based in the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. I run a small digital strategy unit which thinks about new questions that arise for us on the policy front from new bits of technology. I don't specifically work on public sector applications, but my colleague David is going to be speaking after that, and I know that that's much more his terrain, so hopefully we will move seamlessly from me to him. In terms of reflections on policy questions around the metaverse, there were sort of three issues I wanted to briefly touch on, which is one, where we think this is going in general, two, why does it matter, and then three, what might the right response be from policymakers? I will endeavour not to repeat anything that's been said already. In terms of where we think this is going, the metaverse as a terminology is quite a big word. You know, I think at the kind of at its outer limit, it's often used to describe fully interoperable virtual worlds where participants can move seamlessly from one platform to another. I think personally there are some very interesting questions about the likelihood of that ultimately arising. I think if you consider the commercial imperatives that a lot of companies are under who will be involved in building this, the tendency is towards walled gardens, because that's how you contain your user base and you monetize essentially. So I think there are some questions around that for me. I think what's indisputable, though, aside from this bigger context, is that specific immersive virtual worlds, which can be accessed via virtual reality headsets, which offer 3D kind of rendered visuals, exist today. And they're out there, they're working, they offer a series of really interesting questions for policymakers. So that's a little bit on where these might be going. In terms of why they matter, I think ultimately, here we come back to some of the fascinating use cases that colleagues on this call have already been talking about. I mean, there clearly are some very interesting potential applications here, which may emerge in future. I think to mention one, which I don't think has been touched on already, is skills. I think, for example, if one is a surgeon working in a very high pressure context where physical motility is really important, the opportunity to practice in a rendered environment potentially is very helpful. Equally, if you think about people working in high risk, low frequency scenarios, for example, armed forces in many countries, again, the opportunity to practice in a digitally rendered world could be extremely helpful. There are also use cases in the here and now. I'm sure everyone's found Suan's talk fascinating, but there's clearly specific applications going on in Seoul. I think we've all also noticed Barbados's announcement in 2021 that it was going to set up a digital sort of virtual embassy and extend some of its diplomatic missions through that way. So these things are clearly having an impact in the here and now. In terms of what is the right response from policymakers, I think that's a really interesting question. I think ultimately, from my personal perspective, new technology always brings new opportunities, and it's right as policymakers that we are excited about this because they potentially open new doors for us. I think we also need to be pragmatic, and I think it's worth saying that we are in the very early stages of use cases for really quite a lot of these areas, and equally adoption is not very broad at the moment. In the UK, as far as we're aware, there are not significant numbers of people using immersive virtual worlds. So I think, from government's perspective, we can't and mustn't adopt technology for the sake of it. We have, as Benjamin was saying prior, to be really, really clear about what is the benefit for the user from adoption. So I think pragmatism is important here. I think we also need to be alive to some of the challenges and risks that new technology of this type could pose. I think that there are a number. There are already questions about safety in some digital contexts, and I think there are some really interesting questions that arise about how that might adapt and change in contexts that could be much more engaging than a standard digital platform at present. And equally, how might one reflect on physical interactions between avatars if in time they really are seen as extensions of ourselves? So there's an interesting question there. I'd really agree with what Dr. Gertrude was saying about interoperability. I think that's a really interesting question for government, particularly in the context of the speculation or the hypothesis that we may find immersive virtual worlds exist as walled gardens. What might that mean for government on interoperability? Does it imply anything for us on the action front there? And then equally, the most important one from my perspective, which a number of speakers have touched on already, is the access question. I think there is a high barrier to entry to immersive virtual worlds at present, which includes a high level of digital literacy required. In some instances, expensive electronic equipment, including headsets, is required. I think government in general always needs to be very cautious before it thinks about expanding into spaces where the access barriers are very significant. So to briefly summarize, there's a huge amount going on this globally already. We're also very struck by the fact that France has released a metaverse strategy recently, and clearly colleagues are thinking about this in great depth already. I think my view on this is generally we need to be coming at it pragmatically with a clear eye on risks and opportunities, but also fundamentally need, as always, to be excited about the potential that new technology brings us. And I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much. And I really like that. There's something in the kind of be excited, but be pragmatic at the same time. I think that kind of nicely sums up kind of where many of our panelists are at the moment. And also interesting what you said about the terminology itself. Will there ever be one metaverse, a seamless metaverse, or are we looking more at a creation of kind of a series of walled gardens, as you called them, and what does that mean then for how they operate between each other? And also you phrasing the access question, not just around digital literacy, as we'd already heard, but also the question of cost potentially being a barrier to entry for a lot of people. And then the interesting point that you raised there about, again, not just cybersecurity, but that issue of what happens when avatars meet each other and if there's some kind of altercation between avatars. So I think lots and lots of questions and lots of food for thought. Thanks so much, Hannah. David, I know this is hard for you because so much has been said already, but we're coming to you for the final opening remarks.
Great, thank you very much, and thanks to all the previous speakers. I think pick up on the last part. I think this is a field, like so many emerging technology fields, where kind of optimistic skepticism is probably the appropriate response. Is kind of be curious and engage, but ask to know how it works. So yeah, great to see everybody. Yeah, my name is David Knott. I'm the CTO for the UK government for the last 3 weeks. So I'm relatively new in role after a long career in the private sector, and I sit within the Central Digital and Data Office, where we try to lead strategy and the progression of technology across the UK government. So my main interest in the metaverse is in its role as a potential vehicle for the digital transformation of government services. And my main question that is starting to be answered by the conversations on this call are when and whether it will become, the metaverse might become a vehicle for that digital transformation. I'm going to share in the chat, we do actually have a published data and digital roadmap, which extends to 2025, part of which I'm accountable for delivering. So there's 2 parts of that roadmap that I think the metaverse most obviously touches on, and those are a focus on transforming government services and a focus on our mobile strategy. We've got a commitment in there to take of the top 75 services that government delivers to the country, to make 50 of those what we call great, digitally great, which means, as you can imagine, good in all the dimensions of user-centered design, customer experience, resilience, reliability, all those kinds of things. So we're really focused on that. I think the interesting potential impact of the metaverse would be if in that time frame, and I think it might not within that time frame, it shifts the definition of what great means, because obviously in a digital world, great is always changing. What we saw as great in the initial .com era is not what we think of as great today. The second thing is the mobile strategy. So we've made great progress over recent years of taking manual government processes and moving them online. But I would say right now, certainly in the UK, our web presence is much stronger than our mobile presence. And if we look at how people want to interact with us, they want to interact through their mobiles, as everybody does in the digital world these days. Now, you'll notice I've used the word want a couple of times in there. I think I'd echo exactly what Hannah was saying, was that we are looking to respond to demand. And so what I think we'll be doing with both those services and the mobile strategy, so services will keep a sharp eye on what great means. And for the mobile strategy, we'll make sure we're building architectures which decouple the presentation of experience from the processing behind the scenes, so that we could present into a digital virtual world if needed. But right now, we're not actually seeing massive demand and take up for that. So I think the focus of people who are giving us advice on where we should focus first would still be on great digital experiences delivered through mobile devices. I'd also say there's 2 other parts of our strategy that the metaverse touches on, and that's we are looking to make government services more resilient and more secure. I think it's an interesting reflection. I think certainly in my very long career, I've seen several major shifts in the way humans interact with machines. I've seen like the PC revolution, moving away from green screens to more rich graphical experiences. The initial digital internet revolution, where services moved online, and then the mobile revolution, where we moved from big devices to little devices. Every single one of those has added enormous value, but they've also created new challenges from security and resilience. So with the move to PCs, we suddenly had to secure the end user device as well as the back-end systems. As we moved onto the internet, we had to think about how systems that had been designed for private networks suddenly had to connect to public networks. And particularly as we move to mobile, which I think is probably most analogous to what the metaverse could look like, we had to deal with the fact, and I was working in banking at the time, that things that people did infrequently and at low volume suddenly became things they did frequently and at high volume, and that suddenly released a flood of interactions with the back-end systems. Now, I don't know exactly what security challenges the metaverse is going to present, but I'm pretty sure that as it grows, it will extend the attack surface for bad actors. I similarly don't quite know what demands it's going to impose on resilience and resources, but I'm pretty sure that delivering a rich virtual world type experience into something like the metaverse is going to be a bit more demanding than sending a form to a browser. So I think we can see both security and resilience requirements increase. So in summary, I think our current focus is to deliver great digital services that are secure and resilient through the mechanisms that people want. Right now, the priority there is mobile, but as the metaverse grows, as interest grows, that may shift. If it shifts, we'll have to adapt accordingly.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, David. I mean, as you say, really interesting to hear your thinking. Quite a challenge for you only 3 weeks in to be doing a kind of a webinar on the metaverse and public services, but how you see that sitting within the kind of digital transformation journey, the digital transformation strategy, and now the mobile strategy, and what you say, very much a demand for more mobile services, not yet seeing that demand for kind of these virtual, immersive kind of experiences. And also you mentioned there the kind of new challenges that every stage of kind of new technologies have brought us, which brings me on to my first question. So thank you so much for all of your presentations. Thank you to the audience. We've already got questions coming in. I'm going to go to those in a minute, but I do want to pick up there on what David said at the end, because my question as I was listening to all of you is, do you think there is a danger in this kind of optimism, but cautious optimism, that in the public sector we're just moving too slowly, and that actually have we learnt lessons from the past, for example, in how difficult it is now, for example, to keep people safe online, to kind of regulate social media, for example? Are we too slow to be thinking about the regulation that's required around the metaverse, given that it's almost inevitable it is here to stay? So do you think we should be taking more rapid action on this? I'm going to shake up the order a little bit. Hannah, I'm going to come to you first on this one.
I think it's a really interesting question, Siobhan. I guess it's a different question from the one of public service adoption, isn't it? There's a question of public service adoption. There's a separate question about government regulation. I think it's quite important that regulators are responding to the world that exists as opposed to the world they hypothesize might exist in future. I think it's very important that we're not setting up frameworks that get in the way of people being able to be innovative and thinking about products that might emerge in future. And pragmatically, I think it can be quite challenging to develop regulatory frameworks in particular when we've not got sight yet of what use cases really might be and what they really might mean. So I think giving oneself space to be clear-eyed about what is in fact emerging is really important. And I personally think a rush to jump on regulation means you risk jumping to a format that you fundamentally need to unpick. So that's kind of my general view on the position. But obviously you need to think through very carefully what you think you see emerging in each context and apply that as is needed in each context.
Thanks, Hannah. Gayatri, I'm going to come to your thoughts. How difficult is this balance between allowing innovation to flourish but getting the regulation right? Thanks.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Because there are several diverse aspects here we need to think about. It is not a simple thing to come out with a regulatory policy, because we need to think of several aspects like data privacy and security, and then also intellectual property rights. So because there is a lot of creative and artistic works involved here, then we need to protect their rights, and also we need to think of consumer rights, then content regulation and ethical standards. So several things are there. And it's not just one thing that we can say we can come up with a simple policy like thing. So it is going to be a big challenge. And I think we are just at maybe even stage 0. And as David said, so right now our focus should be on mobile. And then as the world evolves towards Web 3.0 and with high-speed internet, probably we can think of the future metaverse. Thank you.
Thanks. David, I mean, the reason I started this question, I think, is because you mentioned, you know, that with each new technology, then kind of the bad actors find a way to kind of exploit that new technology. So your thoughts on kind of, do we need to move faster on those, the kind of regulation, keeping people secure?
Yeah, so I've got a couple of thoughts. So I'd probably say I'm definitely not the policy expert or the regulation expert. I've mostly been on the receiving end rather than on the formulating end of those. So I guess I'll probably come this more from a technology angle, which is, you know, should technologists be formulating defenses against potential attack vectors through the metaverse? Absolutely. That's definitely a space where moving slowly is always too slowly. That's less to emphasize it's more of a technology perspective than a policy perspective. I think one thing that makes me feel like we may have a little more time is that if I think back to some of those other big shifts and actually other shifts that are going on right now, then I see probably a characteristic of explosive growth. So, you know, so the growth rate of PCs when they hit the market was very high. The growth rate of the internet was very high. The growth rate of mobile devices very high. Right now, you can see in all the press, you know, the growth rate of the use of generative AI is extremely high. Whereas actually with the metaverse, the growth rate appears to have plateaued somewhat and been higher in niche use cases like gaming and other areas. So I don't want to be complacent by thinking we've got too much time. And again, from a technology perspective, I think, you know, fortunately, there are large parts of the technology industry whose job it is to kind of think around corners and think where the attacks may be coming from. I think the bit that I think we could probably do a bit more thinking on, I emphasize, and I know certainly in my previous roles, we were kind of caught out a bit technically, was, for example, in the mobile revolution, we didn't anticipate the wave of extra demand and capacity that describes. So I was in the banking world, the fact that everybody would move from getting a letter in the post that told them their balance or their statement once a month to checking their balance several times a day was a complete surprise. So I think resilience, capacity, the ability of the technology to withstand shocks, and those are the things we're thinking about anyway. But I think we need to think about if there is a surge in this area, what will that surge demand of our back-end systems?
You're muted.
Benjamin, sorry, we've got lots of questions coming in, but I did want to give you an opportunity. Did you want to add anything on the
I would, yeah, just very quickly, because this is, like David, not my field of expertise, but my colleagues in the regulatory division at the OECD, 2 years ago, we have a regulatory policy committee, and there is a fairly recent recommendation which is for agile regulatory governance to harness innovation. So it's intended to help governments develop the regimes that help get ahead of these conversations rather than being taken by surprise and suffer some of those consequences. I'll pop the link to the chat because it covers a lot of helpful ground.
Thank you. And don't worry, to everybody who's getting links sent in the chat, we will resend them as well after the webinar. So we'll make sure that everybody who's registered gets all of those links as well. So to the questions that are coming in, we've got two that are very similar and a very interesting questions. So from Marlon Davies, and from just OM is the name. The questions are around, could you please share your thoughts on the energy consumption or emissions that come from metaverse applications? Might this not be an issue when it comes to kind of meeting climate change objectives? And similarly, has said, considering climate change, how is producing the electricity to power this computing power being considered? Gayatri, I want to start with you. Is this something you have thought about in your thinking on, you know, government considerations when it comes to using the metaverse? Is this an issue big enough for governments to need to consider it?
Yeah, Web 3.0, it needs a very high-speed internet. And also metaverse demands very huge infrastructure, and it is an energy guzzler. So definitely it needs a huge, in terms of energy, there is a lot of resource requirement. So governments should think on investing in energy, and also so as I said, so we need to, because right now it is a kind of not a government's matter. It is mostly dealt by private industry right now. So maybe government has to partner with private industry and come up with models so that they can establish and maintain such kind of infrastructure and a sustainable model only through PPP models. Yeah.
Thanks, Gayatri. Benjamin, did you want to add anything on the issue of kind of the energy consumption required for the metaverse?
I think increasingly it is something that everyone is very mindful of, that new technologies bring with them an environmental impact. I unfortunately don't have the detail of this, but maybe I can find it and we can send it afterwards. But I noticed somebody, actually maybe Hannah or David can speak to it because it was in the UK, that I think a team in the NHS were really starting from that base principle at the very beginning to see how to make something completely environmentally neutral. And I think that sort of practice is increasingly a habit, and it doesn't then matter what the technology is it's a much greater awareness that teams have when they're looking at the problems they're solving.
Thanks, Benjamin. Hannah, you were smiling at what Benjamin said there. Did that resonate with you, that actually those considerations would be built in anyway from the start?
I mean, I think it's difficult to, I think, again, in a context of not having a clear hold on all the use cases that might emerge, I think it's difficult to be categorical about what might or might not be built in. But I think Benjamin is absolutely right that this applies across a wide range of technologies, and there are a lot of people thinking about it in those technology spaces at the moment. You know, I think we're aware on distributed ledger technology, there's been some quite interesting developments recently that have been specifically aimed at making the whole system less energy intensive. So I think it's a concern, but it's a concern that applies in a range of contexts and needs to be considered in a range of contexts, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. David, did you want to add anything on the climate change implications?
Just a couple of quick thoughts. So I think the first thought is that, I mean, to be honest, I think one of the things has shifted to Benjamin's point about, you know, building these thoughts in from the outset, is that it's great to see the questions. 10 years ago on a panel about computing, we probably wouldn't have had those questions. And I think now it's increasingly common for tech providers, governments, organizations to be stating what is the carbon footprint of the computing estate and to be taking active measures to control that. So the fact is on the agenda now. The second thing I think is an unknown is what other offsetting impacts there may be in, you know, following adoption. I mean, it's not the metaverse, but I was reading about an example, some analysis just this week where people have compared what was the environmental impact of people shifting to virtual GP appointments, for example. And when you added in the net impact of, you know, the patient not traveling, the GP not traveling, them not necessarily heating and staffing a clinic, all that kind of stuff, it was a net positive. So that would be difficult to replicate unless fantastic improvements in avatars in the metaverse world, but there may be similar impacts that come along.
Great, thanks, David. Okay, we're going to head on to the next question. This one was directed at Sue-Ann. We will ask Sue-Ann to answer this afterwards, but I want to put it to all of you as well, because it was something that I was thinking as Sue-Ann was doing her presentation. And this is from Stephen Lucas. And the question is, a lot of the services that are available on Metaverse Soul, such as virtual counseling, paying your tax, for example, digitally, many of these services can already be provided on other platforms. So the question from Stephen is, what advantages does the metaverse have as a medium for the provision of services over some of these other platforms that are already available? So is essentially, I think the question, the metaverse just going to be pulling together lots of other platforms that already exist? David, you're kind of smiling. Is that your thinking on this, or do you see an added benefit?
I do see some added benefit, but I think we haven't yet discovered the full benefit yet. So again, I have seen some research which suggests that for certain types of experiences, the physicality, you know, the immersion of a virtual world does offer advantages over an experience like the one we're having at the moment. And I think two I've seen so far. One has been in learning experiences where you have students in a group learning setting, then the more natural environment of people being able to kind of, it sounds trivial, but yeah, research has shown it actually has an effect. People have to orient themselves, so you show, you know that you're talking to this person rather than addressing a panel of faces on a screen, where we might think we're looking at each other, but we can never be certain that we actually are looking at each other. So that has enhanced experiences. And then other learning contexts where immersion has been, I did hear an example which again might sound trivial, but it was a real world example. Walmart were using virtual reality training rather than metaverse training to prepare their staff for dealing with a sort of Black Friday shopping rush, because it's pretty chaotic, and people need training. It's pretty difficult to expand to create that experience in real life. So I think there are some emerging cases where the kind of the physicality and immersion does offer something above and beyond. But again, I think we will discover those as usage grows, rather than being able to anticipate them all up front.
Thanks. So Gayatri, I'm going to put the same question to you, because you mentioned those 3 policy areas in your presentation where you saw the metaverse as having potential benefits. Do you think those could also be done on other platforms, or do you think that it's that immersive virtual experience that brings that next level of kind of experience? Gayatri, the question to you, I don't know if you can hear.
Oh, I'm sorry, I could not get the question. Can you please repeat?
So the question is, do you think some of these services could be done on other platforms already, like Zoom, like WebEx? And what additional benefits might the metaverse bring in terms of service delivery? So I was mentioning those areas you said in your presentation at the beginning, like agriculture, education. Do you think those could equally be achieved using platforms that already exist, like Zoom? Or where do you see the added benefit of the metaverse coming in?
Yeah, definitely the experience is going to be different. It's going to be immersive, and the users are going to get more engaged instead of a regular kind of a boredom kind of view. They might get more experience, more immersive experience with the metaverse kind of platforms. So definitely it's going to be a different experience.
Thanks. Benjamin, you're on this Stephen Lucas question. Did you think there was anything then in Soul Metaverse that you kind of went, oh yeah, now I understand that isn't just kind of bringing together things that already exist, it's something else, something bigger than that?
I think there's the sense in Soul of creating a destination which allows for pulling things together in a way that is maybe not possible in other environments. I think I'm where Stephen is, though, mostly on this question, in feeling that most of the examples are not so much the fully immersive thing. They are clear value adds, but in maybe a more discreet and contained way. But we have to see.
Thanks. Hannah, I'm going to put this question to you in a slightly different way. So my thinking was you'd given examples, for example, of surgeons training in an immersive environment. That's something that has to be done in kind of that virtual immersive space to be added benefit. Do you see other potential benefits for civil service? Given our audience are probably all civil servants and public servants, do you think there could be other applications for this across the public sector itself? So looking internally at the way we do things. So maybe helping with hybrid working. So that's a more kind of immersive experience, or training some of our own staff in a different way.
I think it's a really interesting question. And I think coming back to the points that both Benjamin and David were making, the distinction we've got to be thinking about here, to my mind, is immersiveness. Interacting with a series of kind of digital platforms, we do it already. The distinction I think I can see with immersive virtual worlds, or things we describe as metaverses, is you're really profoundly in them in a way you're not elsewhere. I think there very well could be other applications, which could be, You know, for example, David was just giving the example of meetings where you are more able to physically orientate yourself towards a person. There is a potential significant benefit there. The skills one for me is the one that comes back most often and most strongly, because it just feels like the opportunity to replicate scenarios that are risky or high pressure and that require sort of physical engagement it feels particularly unique in this context. I think there could be others. I think we need to some extent, again, wait for clearer use cases to emerge, actually wait for more research on what the immersiveness adds that is different, that sort of is clearly and specifically different from platforms.
Okay, thanks, Anna. We've got a question in from Sekar Vadari, who said, and this came up, the question of interoperability, and it said, how important is interoperability lest few big companies continue to control the metaverse? So could this adversely affect citizen services? So again, I think this is a little bit of the question of, if we sit back as the public sector and let the big private sector companies, the big tech companies, shape the metaverse, are we then playing catch up? Are we inevitably going to have to play in their metaverse if we want the whole system to be interoperable? Benjamin, you're kind of nodding to that one.
I think it's really interesting, and it is a shame that Suan's not here still, because I think it's really interesting that Seoul have made their own, that they attempted to start using something that did exist, and then they've created their own walled garden. And I think probably we have seen in the last decades how initial thoughts of something that is open and shareable inevitably then ends up turning into, we need to make it bespoke because we have our particular special snowflake, we're particular what we need out of it, before then the opening up again to say, well, we're kind of duplicating effort, we could benefit more by if we interacted and shared more. Some of the work that I've been doing at the moment is on digital identity, and so the interoperability of different solutions for identity, which is a very domestically sensitive question, is now beginning to become much more of a conversation. And I wonder whether that is possibly what we see, sort of this funnel, this like I can't quite describe it, but like the expansion to the contracting to the expansion again of how people think about this. And yeah, I mean, obviously standard settings bodies like the OECD help set the parameters for these conversations. So I think this is a watch this space probably conversation.
Thanks. I'm going to ask the same question to all three of you that are left, but Marlene has come back with kind of an add-on, which is adding on to that question, very similar, which is, can you share your thoughts on increasing government's dependencies on for-profit tech companies such as Meta, with potential lock-in effects in the future, because the IT knowledge and the tech experts will probably always be rather with companies than with governments? So it's a similar kind of question. It's, are we relying on big tech companies to shape this, rather than is it a partnership? So is it a partnership, or are we relying on them to the extent we're then dependent on the way that they shape this? Gayatri, you mentioned a lot the need for a public-private partnership approach just in terms of affordability, but are there some risks then involved in letting the big tech companies really shape the way the metaverse is developing?
Yeah, definitely. There could be risks associated with this because we need a constant engagement with the government. Government needs to be constantly engaged with private companies for sustainability. So we need to have long-term plans for a constant engagement with the private sector to maintain a continuity in services, and also to make it more affordable over a long period. Yeah.
Thanks, Gayatri. David, so your thoughts, we obviously want to be governments, private sector, public sector need to be working together on this, but where's the right balance in that mix?
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts. I think first of all on interoperability, and I was reflecting on the fact that actually, the internet is built of standards. The internet is built on actually a relatively small set of network protocols. Everything's built out of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, but actually that's still, despite the fact that those are all completely open, public standards hasn't stopped concentration in the hands of a relatively small number of companies. And that's because, to be honest, just the effort involved in building hyperscale infrastructure, marshalling big data sets, building global businesses are typically going to be the province of a few companies. I don't think there's a problem in us buying technology solutions at the platform layer from companies. I mean, we do that today and have, to be honest, always done that. I started, I spent most of my career in private sector. Actually, my very first programming job was for, as a COBOL programmer back in the 1980s. I was writing code on a mainframe manufactured by a private company that was completely locked in at that time, and that was decades ago. I think the key thing as ever with working with private companies is to make sure that we're commercially astute, we have appropriate competition, appropriate and fair competition, and that we are eyes open in terms of how we use those companies, and that where we choose to put our efforts, the effort of the stuff we build, is on the stuff that really matters and that we can't buy as commodity elsewhere in the market. It is always a tightrope, but I think it is a tightrope that we've been walking for pretty much the entire history of computing.
Thanks, David. Hannah, did you want to add anything?
I have nothing to add to what David just said. I entirely agree.
Right. Then I have one final question for all of you. I don't want to end on a very pessimistic note, but I do, everybody's mentioned the kind of potential risks, I think, and needing to be alert to the potential risks and risks to the citizen in terms of safety. For example, Hannah, you mentioned, for example, what might happen if two avatars have a kind of physical altercation. But I just wanted to ask your thoughts on, how might we protect people from some of the other risks? We've seen during the pandemic, for example, that conspiracy theories, misinformation can spread very quickly in a digital world. Could that be even worse in a virtual world? And also, might there be some issues around, for example, could people access a virtual gambling world, for example? So will it exacerbate kind of addiction, those kind of issues? So risks that already exist with the technologies that we have now or in the real world, could a virtual immersive world make some of those even worse? Hannah, I'm going to start with you, your thoughts on this.
I mean, I think it feels intuitively, it feels entirely possible. I think if a lot of the behaviors we worry about online are driven, at least in part, by the fact that the online context is a very compelling one, what happens when it becomes more compelling? I don't think there's enough research on there out there on this yet, and I think we need more. But intuitively, it feels like an absolute risk to me that we as government are going to need to keep a very firm eye on. I would say the UK has been taking quite significant steps in this place with the online safety bill. I think there will always be a thought process for us to have about what new challenges, new technologies will bring, and this will be one of the ones we need to think about.
Thanks, Hannah. Gayatri, your closing thoughts on kind of how we protect people from some of those potential risks, and do you think those risks are a real possibility?
Yeah, so the pandemic actually, it has highlighted the potential benefits of virtual environments, like the ability to connect with others remotely and to access services and resources from home or maybe from anywhere. So in this sense, the pandemic may have accelerated the development and adoption of metaverse-based systems. As governments and organizations, they seek to find newer ways of engaging with citizens and customers in a socially distanced world, right? And also the pandemic has highlighted the importance of cybersecurity and also data privacy, because more and more people have moved online to work or to learn or even to socialize. So this could lead to increased scrutiny of the future foreseen metaverse-based systems and the greater demand for secured and private virtual environments.
Thanks, Gayatri. So certainly there are those risks, but as you said, the pandemic also highlighted the benefits of new technology as well.
It has actually triggered.
Yeah. And in your thinking, could then have laid the foundation for this next.
That would be some starting point somewhere.
Yeah.
Somewhere in middle or somewhere at the starting level.
Thanks, Gotcha. I like your voice on here because I think you're slightly more on the, this is going to happen and I'm very excited about it.
Yes, definitely sometime or later.
Yeah, thanks, Kachi. David, your thoughts on kind of these possible risks, though, with the metaverse, and are we paying enough attention to those?
Yeah, so I think the lessons of probably the last 20 years or so, the growth of digital life has shown us that there will be definitely some risks we will find difficult to anticipate. So I think there are aspects of digital life today that we didn't predict. I think the key thing, and I think Hannah mentioned about existing measures we're taking, is to learn from what's happened so far. We didn't expect that we'd be dealing with problems of addiction to social media platforms. We didn't expect that misinformation would be so rife. We didn't expect, read Tim Berners-Lee saying, if it was going back and designing some of the internet protocols at a technical level, security would be a much more built-in feature than it is now. So I think we have that experience in the past, and hopefully we can learn those lessons as the protocols and approaches and governance of digital worlds become more prevalent. I think don't want to sound too pessimistic, but I think the thing we can guarantee is there will be new risks that we have absolutely no idea what they are, sitting where we are today. And I think to the earlier points on being kind of agile and thinking about regulation that is appropriate but doesn't stifle innovation, we'll probably have to respond quite quickly at the appropriate time.
Thanks, David. Benjamin, we started with you, so I'm going to end with you. So very quickly, your thoughts on the risk, but also you did say at the beginning that you were interested in sitting back and listening and maybe having your opinion changed. And so I'm curious whether your opinion has changed on anything throughout this webinar.
Well, on the question of the risks, I think my reflection there is that there's a twin problem, perhaps. There's like the final mile of people in the metaverse who may be susceptible to these things, but everything else that we know about mis and disinformation and other addictions and other things is that there's very much a journey that people are going on until that point happens. And so however much the metaverse might be a place to provide services or whatever, there will be people in there who may well need support, and that support needs to probably form part of the wider thinking around tackling some of those things. We have a resource hub at the OECD about dis and misinformation, which I can post in the chat. On whether my pessimism, I suppose, is challenged. Definitely, I think there's some reasons to be optimistic and areas to see where this might lead. I think it's one thing that's particularly positive is that in Seoul they've taken a long-term approach to this, and they've said this is something that we are trying to achieve. It is not a flash in the pan. We're going to commit to this and we're going to build towards something, and I think that helps the rest of the world learn from what they're doing. I'm not sure everyone is going to jump into doing that, but they're still early in that process, and so it's something to watch, and as David's just been talking about, to learn from and see what the lessons that spits out for good, and hopefully more for good than for ill, but for both sides of the equation.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Benjamin. And sadly, that does bring us to the end of our time. Fascinating discussion. I think going back to Hannah, what you said, I think we can sum it up as the panel being excited, but also pragmatic. And I think that's probably a very good place for public servants and civil servants to be. Thank you so much to all of our speakers, to Benjamin, to Suan, who had to leave, to Dr. Gayatri, to Hannah, and to David for giving us so much of your expertise and your time today. We have sent a questionnaire out to the audience. If you could take a few minutes to fill that in for us, that would be great, because it makes sure we keep giving you the webinars that are of most use to you. And you will also see on your screens now that we have our next webinar on the future of healthcare post-COVID. That's on the 13th of June. But on our website, you can see all the information about all of our up and coming webinars as well. We will be sending a link of today's video to everyone who registered, so you can watch it all again. You can share it with all of your colleagues as well if you think they will find it interesting. And we will also be capturing the key messages in an article which will be circulated in a couple of weeks' time. But for now, a big thank you again to our brilliant panel today. I hope to see you on one of our webinars again very soon, and enjoy the rest of the day, everyone, wherever you are. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye for now.
Thank you.